Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Introduction to Government lecture. We are going to go ahead and get started here. So we're going to go over some basic terms and some key terms that we need to understand as we move forward in our discussion of government this semester. So the first thing that I want to talk about is this idea of the state, right? And the characteristics of the state, what we mean when we say that. So first of all, the key characteristic of the state is the population. You have to have people, right? In order to have a state or a nation or a country, you've got to have people, the population, okay, in order to organize and form the state. Second, you have to have the territory. There has to be some sort of place or boundaries that these people inhabit, that these people live on, right? Or understand as their own. Third, you have to have sovereignty. You have to have the right to rule that land and over these people. And then fourth, in order for a state to really be considered a state, the fourth characteristic here is there has to be some sort of government, some sort of structure in order to rule the people and the land, right? So you've got to have the right to rule, and then you've got to create some sort of structure in order to organize the people in order to live on that land and that territory. There's a number of ways that the states can form, but the way that it really has happened here in the United States is what we call the social contract, okay? And I really like how this cartoon depicts that, right? You've got this guy on the left, you won't kill me, I won't kill you. And the guy on the right, hey, sounds great, right? The social contract means that you've given up some freedom in order or in exchange for order, right? So these people have agreed that they're not going to kill each other, right? That there's this social contract. They're not writing an actual contract. It's just kind of this understanding, right? They've given up some of their freedoms. They've given up the freedom to kill one another in exchange for order. Okay, and so this is the idea of the social contract. And this is really the idea that was the formation of the state of this kind of group of people and land here in the United States. A couple of functions of government, right? What does government do? First of all, we know government, kind of their main job, their function, what they're supposed to do is maintain order. They do this by things like creating and enforcing laws. All right. They also provide services. So think about this in terms of responding to national disasters. Over time, this idea of what types of services the government has provided has changed. And so before the Great Depression, it looked very different than after the Great Depression. But perhaps now we see things like providing services such as welfare benefits or unemployment benefits, right? These are the types of services that our government does, or a function of the government here in the United States today. Another function of the government is to resolve any conflicts, right? We usually use the courts to do that here in the United States, but the idea is they can resolve conflicts between two groups or two people. And then finally, the function of the government is to promote values, right? However, the conflict then arises of whose values does the government promote? And whose values are, quote, right or wrong. And so this is where we see a lot of disagreement among people regarding government, as this idea of promotion of values and whose values get promoted over others. All right, a couple of different definitions that we need to go over before we move forward in our semester this year. So number one is this idea of democracy, right? Oh, and I just realized those key ideas should be changed at the bottom. Sorry about that. So a democracy, right? What is it? First of all, it's government of the people. That's its most basic definition, is government of the people. The authority in a democracy resides with the people, where voting is their power. The people, either directly or indirectly through representatives, choose their political preferences by electing leaders who represent them in governing bodies. So in the United States, we have the House of Representatives, the Senate, and then the president and vice president. These are all people that we as American citizens vote into office, particularly the members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Their job is to represent the people by making choices, by making laws on behalf of their constituents, on behalf of the people who elected them. Okay, this means that people are ultimately responsible for their political well-being, right? The representatives are supposed to do what the people want, because if they don't, they won't get reelected. The other aspect of a democracy you need to understand is that we really do use this idea of majority rules, right? So you have all these representatives get together, and this means that whatever the majority wants, whatever the most of them want, is what usually ends up happening. However, we live in what we call a constitutional democracy. So this is where the government provides rule by majority. Okay, so just like we talked about with a democracy, right? We elect these representatives. Again, this is a type of democracy. It's called a republic. So some people call it a representative democracy or republic democracy. But ultimately, it's a form of democracy. Majority rules. In a constitutional democracy, though, the government provides rule by majority, and the limitation is on the power of the majority via the citizens' rights. Okay? What this means is the majority can't do whatever it wants because limitations are put on the majority rule in the form of rights given to all citizens. The rights that are guaranteed by the government, these rights that are written in the Constitution, particularly in the Bill of Rights. Okay, and if you think about this with the civil rights movement, for example, right, the majority rule was segregation. Most people wanted segregation. However, okay, there were limitations to that because it was finally agreed that segregation went against the rights of some of the citizens. Therefore, the limitation was put on the majority because of the citizens' rights. Okay? Because the Bill of Rights is for all citizens. The Constitution lays out the basic organization and operation of the government. It describes the powers and the limitations to the government and to the majority, particularly through the Bill of Rights, and what each and every citizen's rights are laid out in the Bill of Rights. Therefore, the rights of the majority are limited. Okay? We can talk about this more in class if it's still confusing. Couple of different systems of government that I want you to know about. The systems of government are based on how the governmental bodies share power. So the first one here is a confederation. So this is an alliance of independent states where the central organization has only the power that's given to it by the independent states. Okay, the central government, the central organization is subordinate to the states and can only act through the states. So in this picture, you have these individual state governments kind of on top of a central organization. So in a confederation, there is a central organization. However, it is subservient to, right? It is beneath. It must answer to the states. The states are supreme in a confederation. The states will come together and cooperate in a matter of common concern. However, no federal law can pass unless all the states agree to this. You may remember this from the Articles of Confederation, kind of that first organized government that we had here in the United States after the Revolution. The federal government didn't really have a lot of power. They couldn't levy taxes. They couldn't regulate commerce or trade. They couldn't pay off war debts. They couldn't make money. They couldn't regulate foreign affairs. And a lot of people really liked this system, especially those who were concerned based on the strong central government that Great Britain had had. But what we see here is the states are supreme. The states have more power. Okay. And again, if you think about the history of the United States during the Civil War, the Confederacy were the southern states, and they were arguing for states' rights. They did not like the power of the central government from the Union, the United States, right? So Confederation is where the states are above the central organization, and the central organization or the central government must answer to the states and can only act through the states. The next system of government is a unitary or a centralist government, and this is where power belongs to a central agency. They may have these kind of local units, but all of these, right, they may have those state governments you can see hiding kind of behind this central government, but they must follow the central agency or report to the central agency. Also, the central government can disband those states. They can disband those local agencies. The states in this system are not sovereign, and they aren't guaranteed a republican form of government by the central government. The founding fathers really thought of England as a unitary system, right? The monarchy in England they were fighting against, they believed that that was an example of a unitary system. And finally, this last system of government that I want to talk about is a federalist system. So this is what we currently use here in the United States under the Constitution that was created. So again, the first system we had was that Confederation, right? Under the Articles of Confederation. And then eventually we ended up adopting the Constitution because the Articles of Confederation just weren't working. And this created a federalist system. This is where the power is divided between the central government and the local or the state governments. Neither is subordinate to the other. Both the state and central governments are independent in some areas. For example, in the United States, education is left up to the states. Each state runs its own education system. There's money from the federal government that goes to the states as long as they're meeting certain requirements, but ultimately the states have the right to run their education how they want. On the other side, immigration is a federal issue. Okay, so that is where the central government makes the laws regarding immigration. So they have independent, they're independent in some areas. Both of them, both the states and the federal government or the central government, we use those phrases interchangeably, do have powers over the citizens. And they both have explicit rights and they both have limitations. And so it's important that you understand that the federalist system is really about dividing power between a central government and the state governments. But neither is subservient. They're both kind of equal. Okay. And so these are just the systems of government that I wanted you to understand. So that concludes the Introduction to Government lecture. Again, it was just about giving you some terms so we could be on the same kind of wavelength regarding some of these definitions and terms. Make sure that you finish those structured notes. If you have any questions, you can visit me in office hours or you can email me. And I look forward to seeing you soon.